The woman arrived precisely at 4 in the afternoon. By then, the wind had been hammering the inn for hours, long enough that I'd actually considered calling it a day, asking James to cover the rest of my shift, and fleeing before the weather got any worse. My wife was heavily pregnant, and with the baby due any day now, the thought of her sitting alone in that little house with the storms rolling in made my stomach twist. I had already shut every window that faced the sea, but the wind still forced its way into the lobby through the smallest seams, slamming doors and knocking over anything light enough to budge. My dad used to say that houses built on the edge of a cliff, staring straight into the open sea, had no protection against evil spirits that roamed its endless blue. He believed the sea swallowed peace and spat out restlessness. Not to dismiss his devotion to old myths and superstitions, but my dad had a habit of falling back on like that whenever he faced something he couldn't quite explain. It was his way of making sense of the chaos. Give the unknown a name, and it becomes a little less frightening. Marevynn Rise, for one, didn't need spirits to feel unsettling. The inn took its name from the strip of elevated land it occupied, a smooth, gentle hill set against an otherwise sheer stretch of cliff, its foundation clinging on as if out of pure stubbornness. The lobby opened directly onto the slope, which gradually leveled out into a pasture, while the top floor rested at the crest of the rise, giving the whole structure a strange, tiered poise above the sea. From this height, the inn faced a cliff-bound inlet, steep, deep, and shoreless, its water tapering into a dark passage. Farther out, where the inlet opened to the world, the northern sea stretched endlessly, gray sky. The wind never really stopped. It hissed, howled, pressed its cold hands against the windows, and reminded everyone who stepped inside that nature had no interest in human affairs. Out here you learned fast. The sea felt nothing for you, and the wind even less. "Good afternoon, madam," I greeted her, trying to infuse my voice with as much warmth as my sleep-deprived body could manage. She stood framed in the doorway, unmoving, as if someone had carved her from cold stone. Her outfit was the first thing that caught my eye, an ensemble that could only be described as funereal. Everything she wore was black, the fitted dress, the gloves, even the small handbag she clutched in both hands. A thin veil draped over her face, softening her features but not hiding the fact that she was strikingly beautiful beneath it. Most guests arrived dressed to impress. Bright scarves, tailored coats, the sort of outfits people put on when they want to be seen checking into a seaside inn. But then there are others, like her, who seem to savor the theatrics of making an entrance, the drama, the mystery, the carefully curated gloom, as if I wouldn't recognize their intentions the moment they stepped over the threshold. She lingered there for a few seconds longer, letting the wind swirl around her before finally crossing into the lobby, and I couldn't help but think she knew exactly the effect she was having. "I have already booked a room for this evening," she said meekly. Her voice was deep and velvety, slipping into the quiet lobby like a dark ribbon of smoke. The one on the top floor, facing the sea with, she paused delicately but unmistakably, a rather particular feature. Our eyes met, only for a heartbeat, but it was a feature. Our eyes met, only for a heartbeat, but it was enough. Behind the thin veil, her olive green eyes shimmered with a pain so carefully restrained it almost looked rehearsed. I recognized something in it and let the moment pass. "One room for tonight," I murmured, offering a courteous nod as I handed her the guest logbook and a pen. The gesture was, admittedly, more ritual than necessity, an ingrained formality, perhaps even my own quiet method of remembering each of them. "I should inform you," she said as she began signing, her handwriting flowing across the page in a single elegant sweep, "that nobody is aware of my arrival here, not even my husband." "It matters not, Mrs. Feynar," I replied with a restrained smile. "The important thing is that you are here now." "No," she whispered, her brows narrowing ever so slightly. Her hand lingered above the page, trembling me to notice. I shook my head gently. Everything will be seen to by morning. It always is. You need not burden yourself with concerns beyond tonight. I understand. She placed the pen down with a faint clink. I closed the logbook and slid it into the drawer at my side. We only accept cash payments, I added in a more somber tone. I trust that will not be inconvenient. I came prepared, she said, her voice devoid of inflection. Very well, I replied, matching her calm neutrality. She hesitated, her gloved fingers curling inward. Tell me, will anyone come looking for me? I assure you, madam, no one shall come looking for you here. As I mentioned, matters will resolve themselves by morning. There is nothing to fear. She gave a faint nod, though her posture remained taut, as if she were bracing for a blow that hadn't yet arrived. She opened, fingers brushing past its contents until she retrieved several crisp bills. She placed them neatly upon the desk. I reached for the receipt book in the top drawer, but she lifted her hand in a gentle, dismissive gesture. There is no need for that, surely. Her head tilted, the faintest curve touching her red lips. A small, fleeting smile that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. You can keep the change. As you wish, madam. I bowed my head, offering a respectful curtsy. And thank you. You're welcome. I placed the brass key on the counter before her. Your room is ready. You may leave your belongings here, and I shall ask someone to deliver them back to your family, should any of them remain. Dinner will be served at 6. Should you have any requests, however small, I am at your service. I believe that will suffice for now, she said. Her gaze for now, she said, her gaze lowering. With a composed, almost absent-minded grace, she let her fingertips glide along the ornate carvings at the counter's edge, as though appreciating a detail only she could truly see. Now, I said gently, there is one question I must ask before you proceed to your room. She looked up. Yes? Is there anything I may do to assist you? Anything at all? She blinked, taken aback. I don't understand. Surely you must know, madam, I said, lowering my voice so only she could hear, that whatever has brought you to Marevynn Rise, there are sometimes measures, small, discreet measures, that may delay what you deem an untimely resolution. Her breath caught. The veil fluttered softly with the tremor, and for a moment the wind outside seemed to hush, listening. I made up my mind months ago, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. And I am quite convinced that whatever comforts you believe might dissuade me from my course. Pleasant as they may appear to others, I have found neither sufficient nor reassuring, not in the slightest. I have crossed this unforgiving land, defied this dreadful weather, and arrived here despite every discouragement placed before me. So you see, my presence alone should tell you my decision is final. I don't mean to pry into matters that aren't mine, I said gently, keeping my voice measured. But your family, there is a Mr. Fëanor in the picture. You mentioned your husband. What would your children? I have none, she said quickly, looking down, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her sleeve. The words carried a brittle, almost fragile edge. Very well, madam, I replied. I shall trouble you no further with my concerns. You may proceed to your room. She looked up then, and for an instant I feared I had offended her gravely. Her face was pale yet dignified, her posture stiff with pride, and her eyes, those striking olive eyes, carried a spark of unmistakable finality. Thank you, she said. Do have a pleasant night. And with that, she turned toward the marble staircase. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, measured and resolute, until she disappeared beyond the bend of the upper landing. Whatever her reservations about coming down here today, I was glad she was keeping them to herself. That was the last I ever saw of Liv Fëanor. Once her footsteps dwindled into silence, I gathered my things and stepped out into the raging wind. leaving Marevynn Rise to its nightly ritual and whatever awaited her beyond that door. On my way home, I made a stop at James's place to let him know it was time for him to take over. My son was born later that same night. In the brief calm between passing storms, I inherited the inn from my father, just as he had from his own father, passed down through the generations only to the men of our line. With it came all the burdens and secrets that had long clung to the walls of the old building, shaping the lives of those who came before me and the life I now led. But Marevynn Rise was not always an inn. In the mid-1800s, when a brutal winter ushered in what the old parish records simply call the winter cough, the building served as a small convalescent house for the afflicted. The fever swept through the coastal village, time on the pasture to the west, weather-beaten stones listing in the wind, their inscriptions blurred, their foundations slowly drowning in moss. Those, at least, were the ones who received proper burials. But there were days when the dead far outnumbered the living, and those who worked at Marevynn Rise simply could not keep pace. The weather was merciless, the ground unbreakable, and time was not on their side. That winter was bitter. The soil froze hard as iron, storms rolled in one after another, and the plague spread faster than the handful of attendants could bury its victims. With no help from the nearest parish and fear thick in the air, the workers turned to a desperate measure. Panic over further contagion only deepened their resolve. Eventually, they resorted to the only course they believed remained, carrying the bodies to the cliff's edge and casting them into the sea. Worked. No one questioned it. More bodies followed as the sickness spread. It was quicker than digging graves, and the sea returned nothing, nor could it have. The narrow inlet below was hemmed in by jagged cliffs, unreachable on foot, and the waves were so violent that no small craft could approach. In every practical sense, it was the perfect place to dispose of anything one wished never to see again. But then something peculiar came to light. It wasn't simply that the bodies disappeared the moment the waves took them. It was that the people themselves vanished, utterly and without echo from memory. Not the slow fading of grief, not the natural erosion of recollection, but a clean erasure. Their names slipped from parish records. Their families forgot they had ever lived. Friends had no memory of them at all. Even deliberate searching, listing names, retracing events, led nowhere. It was as if those individuals had never drawn breath. The sea did not merely consume their remains, it devoured their existence. The first to recognize this anomaly was my great-great-grandfather, Eldrin Alfson, who worked among the attendants caring for the sick. He alone remembered certain patients, men, women, and even children, whose bodies he had seen taken to the cliffside. Yet when he spoke of them, no one understood. Their names bewildered people. Their stories sparked nothing. The world had quietly edited them out, leaving him with the unsettling knowledge that the cliff and the sea below held a property far more troubling than simply hiding the dead. It was an anomaly only he seemed to perceive. That the sea below Marevynn Rise did not merely swallow the dead. It swallowed their entire existence. The discovery tormented him. He was a practical man by all surviving accounts. Level-headed, dutiful, not prone to superstition, and yet he could not deny what he observed. The cliff possessed a power no human was meant to wield, and certainly not one to be spoken of freely. To most, it would have been a horror, but to those with darker impulses, it would have been a temptation. He understood that immediately. In the weeks that followed, he watched with growing unease as the attendants continued their grim work, entirely forgetting the dead moments after casting them into the sea. He alone carried the weight of their names, and with that knowledge came the dawning fear of what might happen if the truth reached the ears of the wrong sort of people, those for whom the disappearance of a person was not tragedy, but convenience, so decision. He swore in a private vow recorded only in a fragment of his journal that he would guard the secret of Marevynn Rise for as long as he lived. Not to protect the cliff, nor the sea below, but to protect others from greed, from malice, from the kind of calculated wickedness that would see this place as an opportunity rather than a curse. He wrote that his duty was not to encourage the use of the cliff, but to police it, to watch, to listen, to turn away those who might come with ill intentions. To him, the real danger was not the anomaly itself, but what certain men might do if they knew an entire existence could be erased without consequence. When the convalescent house was eventually abandoned quietly, without ceremony, he stayed behind. The parish saw no use in maintaining the building once the winter cough finally loosened its grip, and the land was too remote for anything profitable. But Eldrin insisted on remaining as caretaker. He petitioned the parish to let him oversee the old structure and the grounds around it, offering to repair the place himself. To them, it must have seemed a harmless eccentricity. To him, it was a responsibility he could not relinquish, and so the stewardship began. He watched over the cliff and the sea as others might keep vigil over a shrine or a graveyard. He kept its secret close, passed it on only to his eldest son, and charged them quietly, solemnly, to continue the watch. Not because the anomaly served their interests, but because someone had to stand between this place and those who might seek to abuse it. Over time, the building was altered, expanded, reshaped by generations of my family, until it became the Marevynn Rise Inn as its name. It was a fully functional inn perched on the cliffside, a place to drink in the wind-whipped sea, the jagged coastline, and the wild beauty of the surrounding land. No one suspected what lay beneath the surface. But beneath all the fresh paint, the newer walls, the polished floors, the vow remained unchanged. We are not innkeepers by trade, not truly. We are custodians of something far older, far more dangerous than a mere cliff overlooking the sea. The world does not need to know what the sea below Marevynn Rise can do, because if the wrong people ever discovered it, the cliff would drown in more than just forgotten souls. Over time, my family noticed something even more unsettling than the steady trickle of visitors. Marevynn Rise seemed to call to some people. It was never dramatic or obvious. But there was a pull, insistent, undeniable, that reached only those already standing on the threshold between endurance and surrender. As if the cliff itself could sense the weight in a person's chest, or hear the unheard cry beneath their composure. Many of the women who came later described the same thing, though each in her own way. A dream of waves, a sudden, inexplicable certainty, an image of a tall cliff by the sea that would not leave their mind. Some said they felt drawn here by an impulse they could not trace. Others swore they had never heard of Marevynn Rise in their waking life, only to find themselves standing before its doors, as though guided by an invisible hand. The cliff did not lure them with malice. It simply resonated with the depth of their despair, like iron shivering toward a magnet. Those who arrived were not led by rumor alone, but by a sensation they struggled to name. A sense of inevitability, of alignment, as if they had finally reached the one place the world would allow them to vanish without conflict or consequence. But this pull was not universal. Only those already drowning in silence felt it. My family always believed the cliff possessed a kind of awareness, though not in any sentient or compassionate sense. Rather, the anomaly had an affinity for those whose suffering had carved them into a particular shape, those who were ready, those who were willing, those who already felt erased, long before they ever reached the cliff's edge. And because of this uncanny magnetism, the secret of Marevynn Rise never spread beyond the people who probably needed it most. Those untouched by despair never heard it, never dreamed of it, never felt that gravitational tug in their thoughts. Rumors passed selectively, detect. The place chose its listeners. This is why the story never becomes widespread gossip or common knowledge. the cliff filters its own myth. The wicked do not hear it, the curious do not stumble upon it. Only the suffering are drawn in, carried by that quiet, relentless pull until they find themselves at the inn's door. For these people, my family's duty has always been the same, to witness and to guard silently. Not because we endorse their decision, but because Marevynn Rise has already woven them into its gravity long before they ever arrive. For who among us has ever truly stopped the tide? It was late October, a few years after Liv Feanor arrived at the inn, when a thin skin of early snow settled over the pasture, the first of the season, and earlier than anything we were used to along the coast. The days were shrinking quickly each evening, leaving everything bleak and washed in gray. Worse than the cold was the wind, a ceaseless battering gust that came roaring off the sea, rattling the walls and curling through the room with a hunger that made the air feel heavy and unkind. Only a week earlier, one of the telephone poles along the main road had toppled in a night storm, snapping clean at its base as if it were nothing more than a rotten twig. People in town hardly ventured outdoors anymore, slipping out only for the briefest errands before hurrying back inside. Everyone felt it coming that winter, a hard one, the kind that old men whispered about, the kind no one had seen in decades. At home, my 4-year-old son Henry had come down with the flu and a terrible tearing cough. His appetite vanished, and he would sometimes break into quiet sobs for no reason at all, asking only to be held, and hardly bring myself to leave his side. And my hours at the inn grew shorter by the day. My wife, Elin, meanwhile, had taken to spending more time with her sister Eva in the next town over. Eva's baby daughter had just begun teething, small, sharp crescents of white pushing through her gums. The poor girl burned with fever because of it, her tiny body trembling, and Ellen insisted on helping where she could. She said the company did them both good, though I sometimes wondered if it was Henry's sickness, or something else entirely that she wished to escape. I had just laid Henry to rest in his own bed that afternoon, after an uneventful yet exhausting day of tears and comforting, when a heavy knock slammed through the house. It rattled the frame like a gust tearing at loose siding. For a moment, I thought the wind had caught something outside again. Winter storm caught something outside again. Winter storms were already shouldering their way inland. But then the knock came again, sharper. I opened the door to find James on my step, pale, wild-eyed, and breathing as though he'd run the entire way from the inn without stopping. His hair was plastered to his forehead in damp clumps, and his shirt, usually neatly buttoned, hung crooked on his frame with several buttons undone, the fabric rough and rumpled as if he'd been yanked through a briar patch. A thin scratch marked the side of his face, catching the porch light in a sharp, angry line. He looked half frozen, half panicked, and wholly out of place on my doorstep at that hour. "What on earth?" I snapped, louder than I meant to, glancing him up and down. I was still wired, still on edge from Henry's coughing fits and my own lack of sleep. James winced, bending slightly as he tried to catch his breath. "Mr. Alfson, sir, there's a woman at the inn," he gasped. She tried to push past me, insisted she had to stay the night. I looked for her booking, but there was nothing. Rob and John had to tie her up. "She's screaming and crying, sir. Wouldn't stop." He swallowed hard, as if reliving the sound. I let out a long, frustrated sigh and grabbed him by the scruff of his moss-green jacket, pulling him inside. "You stay here with Henry," I told him, my voice low but sharp. "There's ointment in the cupboard by the stove. Put some on that scratch. Do not leave this house until I return. Swear it on your life." I shut the door behind me and stepped back out into the wind. It struck me from every direction at once, hard enough to make my eyes water, shoving cold fingers. I wrestled with my jacket, yanking the zipper up to my chin, careful not to pinch my beard in it like I always did when I rushed. The path toward the pasture was little more than a faint, trodden line in the frost, but I knew it by heart. I leaned into the wind as I walked, boots crunching over the thin crust of early snow. The air carried that sharp, metallic smell that comes before a storm, and each gust sent the grass bowing flat, as if something heavy were passing through it unseen. When I rounded the low rocky hill, the cliffs finally came into view. Marevynn Rise loomed ahead of me, its gray silhouette hunched against the leaden sky like a crooked old man bracing himself for another blow from the wind. A few gulls wheeled and cried overhead, their voices carrying a thin, uneasy note that the wind refused to scatter. Cold, stinging spindrift blew straight into my face as I made my way up the gentle slope toward the inn, each gust carrying the brine of the sea and leaving a bitter, salty aftertaste on my lips. The wind rose in short, vicious bursts, needling my skin and tugging at my jacket as I hurried on. Inside the lobby, the first thing I saw was the woman. She was tied to a chair, Rob and John flanking her like uneasy sentinels. Long, wavy dark hair clung to her cheeks and neck in heavy sodden ropes. I could barely glimpse her face through the dripping strands. She was drenched through, mud streaked her pale blue winter coat, and water pooled beneath her chair, spreading slowly across the floorboards. "Miss," I bent down, leveling myself with her. "What can I do for you?" She lifted her head. Her bloodshot eyes were glassy, unfocused. She was staring through me rather than at me. The sight of her rather young face took me aback. She couldn't have been much older than her mid-20s. "I need a room for the night," she whispered, her voice cracking under the strain. "I have to—" Her breath hitched and she sobbed, shoulders quivering violently. "Please, let me stay here. Just one night. That's all I ask." I glanced at Rob and John and gave a small, firm nod. They loosened the ropes and the woman slumped forward, too weak to rise on her own. I reached out and steadied her beneath the arms. "Rob," I said, keeping my voice low, "fetch a cup of hot tea for Miss." "Lornvik," she murmured, her voice raw as gravel. "Andrea Lornvik." I guided her carefully toward the sofa near the fireplace. Her steps were unsteady, her soaked boots leaving little muddy crescents on the floorboards. "And John," I continued, "see if there are some fresh clothes in the laundry that might fit Miss Lornvik." John hurried off without a word. "They don't understand," she whispered, scrubbing at the tears on her cheeks with the back of her hand. "I have to stay here tonight. I needed to be here." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment she looked as though she might collapse into herself entirely. "Very well, Miss Lornvik," I told her gently, lowering us both onto the sofa. The fire's warmth cast a trembling glow across her face. I took her cold, trembling hands in mine. "Your room will be ready shortly. Cash." She swallowed hard, fingers tightening around mine with surprising strength. "You only take cash, right?" "That's what they told me." I nodded. "We can settle that once you're up and changed into dry clothes. For now, let me get your key." She nodded faintly, as if afraid that even that small motion might undo her. I rose and stepped behind the counter. The brass key lay in the lowest drawer, right where I always kept it. The key to the room reserved for people like her. I returned and extended my hand. "Shall we, miss?" She took it without hesitation, as though all her remaining will was tied to that small gesture. I guided her up the stairs one careful step at a time, my hand lightly at her elbow. She moved as though a strong breath might topple her, her legs trembling under her weight. Will anybody come looking for me?" she whispered, barely forming the words. Her eyes darted around the dim stairwell, searching the shadows as though she expected someone to emerge from them. "No," I answered softly, tapping my fingers against the back of her hand. "Reassurance more than promise. I can guarantee you, miss, that won't happen." She nodded quickly. Good, good. The words were thin and hollow, but she clung to them as if they were the last solid things left in her world. At the top of the stairs, she finally released her grip, though her hands lingered uncertainly in the air for a moment before falling to her sides. She followed in my wake as we passed down the long, narrow corridor toward the round glass window at the far end. It loomed like a dark eye, watching the sea below. Outside, the sea writhed under the bruised sky, each wave thrashing itself against the cliff with a violence that sent sprays of white up into the wind. Even from here, I felt the tremor of it. The glass pane shuddered ever so slightly, rattling in its frame as the across its surface. The door to the lone room on the top floor waited beside it, quiet, unassuming, and terribly final. I pushed the door open and held it for her, but she didn't move. Her attention was fixed on the great round window, her breath catching slightly as she stared down at the sea below.
Help! Help me!
Lorephobia Vault. She didn't. I'll be seeing you again, Jack, she murmured so softly to herself I almost doubted I'd heard it at all. Her voice held no warmth, only a strange, fragile certainty. Soon, my love, very soon. Before I could respond, a muffled scuffle came from the far end of the hall. John appeared at the landing, slightly out of breath, balancing a tray with a small clay teapot and a single glass in one hand, and a folded stack of fresh clothing tucked under the other. I gestured him silently into the room, and he slipped past us with the careful quiet of someone who sensed the wrongness in the air. He set the tray on the small table by the bed and straightened, his eyes flicking toward our guest with a question he had the good sense not to voice. I gave him a firm nod toward the stairs and he withdrew. "Miss Lornvik?" I said gently once we were alone again. She still hadn't taken her eyes off the storm. "Dinner will be ready shortly. I would encourage you to warm yourself, have some tea, and rest. We're just downstairs should you need anything at all." She made no reply, only a slow, shuddering exhale as a fresh tear slid down her cheek and vanished into the collar of her coat. I left her there, standing motionless before the window, the flicker of the hallway lamp trembling across her pale features. And then I began my descent, each step feeling heavier than the one before. That was the last I ever saw of her, though something in her stillness told me she had already begun to slip away. Later that night, after Elin returned from her sister's house, Henry's coughing fits tore through him, shaking his small body until a streak of blood stained the pillow. His fever burned through his skin, and every shiver seemed to hollow him further. We clung to him, helpless, our hands pressing into his frail frame, our hearts breaking with each ragged breath. I whispered his name, over and over, as Elin sobbed into my shoulder, her tears burning me. Then, in one shuddering exhale, he was gone, succumbing to the strange sickness. The storm outside roared like it was tearing the world apart. Another woman arrived at the inn the following week, just as the weather turned even more hostile and furious, as though the storm itself had followed her footsteps across the coastline. By then it had grown so feral that one of the lobby window shutters had been ripped clean off its hinges when Rob tried to open it for a breath of morning air. The wind punched its way through the gap like a living thing, scattering loose papers, rattling the keys on the wall, and sending a spray of cold salt across the floorboards. We had to drape 2 thick woolen blankets over the opening and nail the corners down just to keep the lobby from becoming a... More people were falling ill in the village. The strange sickness seemed to travel on the wind, touching doorways, hearths, and fields alike. Some of us appeared to have developed immunity, or perhaps the disease had passed lightly over us. Others were not so fortunate. My son Henry and James had been among those claimed by its cruel, unrelenting grasp. We laid Henry to rest beside Ellen's father, in the old cemetery on the edge of her hometown, where the grass grew thick and untamed around the weathered stones. The place felt suspended in time, as if it held the echo of every sorrow ever brought to its gates. Grief seeped into the village quietly, slipping through every crack and crevice of our homes, leaving everyone hollowed out in its wake. The weeks following Henry's death were the most suffocating times of our lives. Sleep was fitful and haunted, our dream of his body in my arms. Every corner of the house seemed to whisper his absence. His small chair at the kitchen table remained untouched, a silent testament to the life that had once filled it. I would sometimes find Ellen standing over his toys, tracing the worn edges of a wooden horse or a frayed blanket, her lips moving as if speaking to him, while I sat elsewhere, hands clenched, trying not to shatter in the quiet. Then one cold, rainy morning, I woke to find her standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the sea, her eyes heavy with a longing and emptiness I could not bear. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was rushing to her side, wrapping my arms around her and sobbing into her shoulder. I told her over and over that I could not bear the thought of losing her too, that I felt her pain because I was living it with her. We clung to each other for an hour, holding her. We clung to each other for an hour, holding and crying, letting the grief pour out. It was unbearably hard. But in that shared sorrow, we made a quiet promise to face it together, no matter how long the storm inside us lasted. And it was in the midst of all this that another visitor arrived. Runa Christensen, though I didn't recognize her at first, had once been a famous actress, but fame had not protected her from sorrow. Her life seemed written in losses. Her first husband vanished somewhere in the North Atlantic during the war, swallowed by the sea along with the future they had dreamed of. She had been pregnant at the time, and grief hollowed her so completely that she lost the child soon after. She fled to America a few years later, driven more by heartbreak than ambition, though ambition soon found her anyway. Her second husband was a promising young producer, charming, brilliant, the sort of man who convinced her that happiness might be possible again. For a while it was. Her career flourished. She appeared in 2 Oscar-nominated pictures, supporting roles, yes, but luminous ones, and soon her name sparkled across newspapers and cocktail parties alike. People knew her only by her stage name, Lena Christie. Softer on the ear, easier to market, and a world away from the girl who once answered to Runa Christensen. But success has a short memory, and marriage a shorter fuse. By their 4th year together, his luck had turned. His films flopped, one after another, and with each failure he sank deeper into drink, jealousy, and the sort of bitterness that rots a man from the inside out. By the 6th year, bankrupt and desperate, he had become violent, and Runa Golden, adored Runa, became the nearest target. She divorced him at last, slipped out of their penthouse with nothing but a suitcase and a broken rib. He leapt from the balcony that very night. Hollywood never forgave her for it. Rumors multiplied like flies. The press called her heartless, opportunistic, a gold digger who had climbed too fast and too high. Her films began to fail. Investors withdrew, friends evaporated, and before long she too found herself filing for bankruptcy. One by one, the lights she had lived beneath went dark. And that is how she came to stand before the door of Marevynn Rise on that wild, salt-whipped night, dressed only in a long white silk gown despite the weather, her once glorious golden curls clinging damply to her long neck, her posture still carrying the echo of elegance, even as exhaustion pulled at her bones. She glided into the lobby as though stepping into her last refuge on earth. I greeted her quietly and addressed her by her old name, which seemed to stun her for a heartbeat. It was as though she herself had forgotten. A distant look flickered across her eyes, soft and unfocused, like someone hearing a melody from a childhood they'd long tried to bury. But just as quickly, the moment vanished. Her posture straightened, her chin lifted, and the polished grace of her Hollywood persona slipped neatly back into place, as if it had never faltered. When I asked Rob to escort her upstairs, she declined with a polite shake of her head. She said she would find her way on her own, speaking with the quiet certainty of someone who had walked those halls before, if only in dreams. I nodded and handed her the key, other word. I went upstairs the following morning, and out of habit pushed the door open, only to find the room empty. No trace that she had ever crossed its threshold, not even a lingering whiff of perfume in the air. Only a single item lay upon the pillow, an old, wrinkled black and white photograph, its corners softened by years of handling, showing a handsome young man in a naval uniform. One morning I woke to find Elin gone. The house was unnervingly still. No wind rattling the shutters, no storm pressing against the walls, only the faint, distant murmur of the sea somewhere beyond the fields. A tightness gripped my chest at once. I sprang from the bed, pulled on my old trousers, and snatched my jacket from its hook by the door. My fingers fumbled uselessly with the sleeves as I forced it on, panic pushing me forward, and I stumbled out into the pale morning. The world outside felt suspended, as though holding its breath. The grass in the pasture barely stirred. The sky hung low and colorless, and the only sound was my own hurried footsteps as I ran, cutting across the field, rounding the small rocky hill, and sprinting towards Marevynn Rise with a dread that prickled beneath my skin. By the time I burst through the inn's front doors, my heart was pounding so violently it drowned out the rest of the world. Rob stood behind the counter like a sentry, while John was bent over the lobby floor with a bucket and brush. Both men straightened at the sight of me, their faces tightening with confusion. "Where is Elin?" I managed, my voice barely more than a rasp. "Where is my wife?" Rob frowned, the deep lines between. "Stairs, Mr. Alfson? What is the matter? Is everything all right?" But I was already moving, taking the stairs two at a time. The image of her face that rainy morning flickered sharply through my mind. Hollowed, vacant, stretched taut with the quiet despair I had seen too often in the women who walked through the doors of Marevynn Rise. A look of resolution. At the top floor, the corridor yawned before me. The door to the room stood wide open. I pushed inside and froze. The trapdoor at the center of the floor gaped open, revealing the stone steps leading into the dark cavern below. My pulse hammered harder. I dropped to my knees and descended quickly, nearly slipping in my haste. The tunnel, carved long ago by my great-grandfather, was cool and damp, every breath echoing off the walls as I pushed forward. At last, the passage opened into a square-shaped opening in the cliff wall, hewn straight through the rock. The sea roaring far below, there she was. Elin stood at the very edge, her back to me, her figure framed by the pale morning light. Her white nightdress fluttered softly in the breeze, her hair unbound and shifting like a dark banner. "Elin," I said quietly, careful not to startle her as I inched closer. "Please, step away from there." She turned only slightly, just enough for me to see the tear tracks glistening down her cheeks and neck. Her eyes were red, swollen, hollow with exhaustion. "I can't do this anymore," she choked out, her voice breaking. "I can't. I just want it to end, all of it." I took another small step, my hand reaching toward her trembling form. "I know," I whispered. "I'm not like this. Not here, please, come back to me." Her sobs grew louder, racking her body with each desperate breath, and she sank to her knees, the hem of her dress dangling perilously over the edge. I moved without hesitation and pulled her into my arms, away from the edge. "I swear, my love," I whispered into her ear as she continued to sob, her words catching in her throat. "I swear on my life I will make it go away." Later that night, as she finally drifted into a fitful sleep in my arms, my thoughts wandered back many years to the day Elin and I first met. With all these years spent watching over Marevynn Rise, you may wonder if I ever tried to stop them. The truth is more complicated than a simple yes or no. At times I would pose a question, carefully chosen, to give them pause, something that might stir a memory, a thought, a reason to reconsider. Something that might stir a memory, a thought, a reason to reconsider before they retired to their rooms. Perhaps, I hoped, they would glimpse that there was more to life than the final call of the void. But once that call had been heard, once the inevitability had touched them, a change came over them, a quiet hollowing, as if they were already an empty husk of their former self. And from that point on, there was little anyone could do. Their fates, once set upon that path, could not be unspooled. It was on a glorious summer's day that the girl arrived at the inn many years ago. The air was warm, though still carrying the restless edge of squally weather. I was in my mid-20s then, barely fitted into the role of a humble innkeeper at the edge of the world, and only half-versed in the secrets that Marevynn Rise held. I knew, of course, that these women came and went, their existence quietly erased by forces older than memory. I understood, in broad strokes, the peculiarity of the cliff, the terrible power it held, but the precise mechanism eluded me entirely. Ignorance, almost blissful, shielded me from knowing too much. My father had always treated them with care, kindness, and with the utmost respect. To me, these women were mostly unfamiliar faces, ghosts to the world's memory, wandering briefly before being swallowed by it. That was until I saw her. From the moment she stepped through the door, I knew immediately she was unlike any who had come before. Her presence carried a quiet gravity, the kind of beauty that strikes once in a lifetime, delicate, timeless, yet marred by a subtle misery. I was captivated. Something deep inside me stirred. For what beauty can be so potent that it, the weight of that fascination, I performed my duties with the usual formality. I handed her the logbook and a pen, took her name, settled her payment, and gave her the brass key to her room on the top floor, noting the peculiarities of its placement. She spoke little, moving with the measured grace of someone already half in another world. I reminded her that dinner began at 6. Watching as she glided up the stairs and vanished from view. At Marevynn Rise, dinner left cold and untouched was a familiar pattern, rarely broken, yet still served as a precaution of sorts. I had Rob and John and their insatiable appetites to thank for seeing that it was tended to. A few minutes after 6, I was about to call it a night and leave when I saw her walking down the narrow stairs with quiet steps. Her tea-length dress, fitted at the waist, swayed lightly with each movement. The muted fabric brushing against her legs. Short sleeves revealed slender arms, and her low-heeled shoes made soft clicks on the worn wood. She said nothing, her dark hair pinned back, and yet she seemed to fill the room, even in her silence. "Miss Rosenlund?" I called, slightly taken aback to see her back in the lobby. Most of them never returned downstairs once they reached the top floor. I'm here for dinner," she said, glancing around with a shy uncertainty, her voice barely more than a whisper. For a moment, I could do nothing but watch her, my own voice caught somewhere in my throat. The faint clink of cutlery and murmured conversation from the dining room filled the pause between us. "Is it ready yet?" she asked, hesitantly. I cleared my throat and finally found my voice. "Yeah." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. It made no sense. Guiding guests to their tables was something I did a dozen times a night, but there was something about her that unsettled me in the quietest, most impossible way. I couldn't quite name it. A presence, a gentleness, a gravity that drew the eye and refused to let go. Every step beside her felt strangely weighted, as though the whole room had shifted just slightly off its axis. I guided her toward one of the tables tucked away in the farthest corner, out of sight from the windows and the low clatter of other diners. I was just about to excuse myself and leave her to whatever thoughts she was wrestling with when she spoke again. "Forgive me, but would you mind staying for a moment?" she asked, her voice hesitant, almost fragile. "I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I have some questions to ask." And just like that, for the first time, I was offered a glimpse into the life that existed beneath the austere resolve she had shown at the front desk. She told me she lived in a town not far from Marevynn Rise, barely an hour's drive. Her fiancé had died only weeks before, taken in a freak boating accident along the northern coast. But the tragedy hadn't ended with his death. In the days that followed, while she was still raw with grief, she learned he had not been faithful to her at all. The revelation had come in the most devastating way. Her own younger sister, only 17, was pregnant with his child. They had been seeing each other in secret for nearly 2 years. Now she was left trying to reconcile the man she had loved, the gentle, attentive, almost saint-like figure she believed him to be, with the cold and calculated deceit he had lived behind. And as if that weren't enough, she was forced to face the reality of her sister's betrayal. A betrayal layered so deeply with shame and confusion that she could barely speak of it without her voice trembling. That night, after I wished her good night and watched her disappear up the staircase, I stepped out of the inn in a kind of daze. The night air felt sharper, colder, as though the whole world had shifted in the span of a single conversation. I walked the short distance home without really seeing where I was going. My thoughts tangled and buzzing beneath my skin. I must have unlocked the door and crossed the threshold, but I have no memory of it. The first moment that registered clearly was standing in my garage, lowering myself into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as they closed around the cold steering wheel. I didn't hesitate. I turned the key, backed out, and headed straight for the main cliffside route as though I'd been summoned. I drove almost 50 kilometers in under an hour, the engine protesting as I pushed it harder than I ever had before. And through it all, one thought kept circling in my mind, heavy, insistent, growing darker by the mile, until it drowned out everything else. I was on the verge of committing the unthinkable. The cemetery lay on a gentle rise just outside town, swallowed by stands of birch trees that whispered in the wind. It was the sort of place you wouldn't notice unless you already knew it was there, quiet, secluded, and untouched. The grave sat near the far edge, the soil still fresh, the grass not yet grown back. A few harebells had sprung up around the mound, wild, scattered things with tiny buds just beginning to push through the earth, delicate and utterly oblivious. In my infatuated, fevered mind, I told myself that what I was about to do was justice, retribution even, a twisted way of balancing the scales. After all, how does one punish a man who has wronged others so deeply when he is already dead? You make the world forget he ever existed. And for Elin Rosenlund, I found myself willing to do almost anything if it meant giving her even a chance at happiness again. You had never heard of them before this. But now you know they were here. You've read their stories, traced the faint outlines of the lives they once held, and been allowed a small glimpse into their pain and their restless footsteps through this world. For most, their existence has already vanished, erased, rewritten, swallowed by the quiet hunger of the cliff. But for a moment, through these words, they lived again. For a moment, someone remembered. These women have been wiped clean from all living memory, erased from existence as if they had never breathed. No record remains of them, no trace to be found in archives, in ledgers, or whispered in the stories of others. Each time the wind scours the cliff with its merciless salt, Another secret tumbles down its jagged face, swallowed by the sea. Reality itself reshapes, folding new timelines over the old, insisting that these women never were. Their names dissolve into mist, carried away on the wind. They drift with the waves, fragile as petals tossed into the surf, fleeting and utterly forgotten. It was never only women who found their way to Marevynn Rise, though in time it became mostly so. My father once told me these women aren't weaker. Society simply gives them different wounds. Those who arrived were not weak. They were silenced, carrying burdens the world expected them to endure quietly, grief without audience, shame never theirs to bear. The cliff did not call to weakness. It called to the unheard. He believed Marevynn Rise drew only sorrow wrapped in love. A lost child, a faithless husband, a betrayal that hollowed a life from within. Not the loud rage that some carried into fists and bottles, but the quiet ache that convinces a soul it is unnecessary. The cliff's power is old and attuned to silence, not fury. Perhaps some of them, like Runa, came because erasure was something the world had already practiced on them. To be forgotten by Marevynn Rise was only the final step. The cliff did not create their disappearance. It completed it. Should you ever find yourself at Marevynn Rise, standing on its edge with the sea stretching endless before you, ask yourself, Marevynn Rise, standing on its edge with the sea stretching endless before you, ask yourself this: would the world truly be better without you in it? It's tempting to imagine an easy end to your suffering and into forgetting, but nothing here comes without a cost. What of the ones you would leave behind? What of their grief, their memories, their love? Strange as it is, in certain peculiar ways, our lives are defined by the memories others keep of us. Would it truly be mercy to make them forget you ever existed at all? Or would that be its own kind of cruelty? An absence so complete it leaves no room even for mourning. So there I found myself again. Back in the old cemetery at the edge of the world, I stood before its rust-eaten gate, staring into the sea fog that had rolled in from nowhere, swallowing everything whole. The air tasted like salt and iron. My eyes burned, raw from forcing out the last of my tears. Tears that had turned cold on my cheeks as soon as they fell. I offer these words hoping, perhaps foolishly, that what was broken might be a broken oath passed down through my bloodline for centuries. All because I mistook selfish desire for righteousness. And now the price has come due. The secrets of Marevynn Rise could not remain sealed once my son died. The walls that guarded them cracked the moment his breath left him. For I have no intention of enduring such fleeting solace again. No intention of welcoming a joy so brief, only to watch it be torn from my arms violently. With every step I took, a deeper shiver ran through my body, not from the cold, but from the memories stirring beneath my ribs, pain and regret rising at once like the tide returning to shore. By morning, the storm had spent itself. I crossed the grimly familiar pasture toward my house, soaked to the bone, my legs heavy with exhaustion. Ilin was standing in the doorway, her hair unbrushed, her face pale from sleepless weeks. But when she saw me, she managed a small, hollow smile. The first I had seen in weeks. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Let me know what you thought about tonight's story in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, commenting, and sharing it with others who enjoy horror stories. If you have a creepy, strange, paranormal, or unexplained experience of your own, or know someone who does, you can send it to us through the email address in the description or the pinned comment. You can submit your story either in written form or as a voice recording. If your story is selected, it may be featured in a future video and shared with the Lorephobia Vault community. Thank you for listening. Until next time, keep the vault closed.